Dravyatmaka karma vitana yoga. Nanabidha bhijya ganopapano. Dravyatmaka karma vitana yoga. Brahmananam chatra bhujo mahatma. Vid uru angri shita krishna varna. Namabidha bijagano papano. Dravyatmaka karma vitana yoga. Brahmananam chatra bhujo mahatma. Vid uru angri shita krishna varna. Narabidha bijagano papano. Dravyatmaka karma vitana yoga. Brahma, the Brahmanas. Ananam, the face. Chatra, the Kshatriyas. Bhuja, the arms. Mahatma, the Virat Purusha. Vit, the Vaishyas. Uru, the thighs. Angrishita, under the protection of his feet. Now next one I find very interesting, the way that Srila Prabhupada's translated it here. Krishna Varna, the Shudras. Because we know other places he translates it very differently. Like that verse in the 11th canto, Krishnavanam Tushar Krishnam, he translates Krishnavarna as meaning in the category of Krishna. So, yeah, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I know there's a very different way of translating it. Nana, various, Abhidha, by the names, Abhijagana, the demigods, Upapana, being overtaken, Dravya Atmaka, with feasible goods, Karma, activities, Vitana Yoga, performances of sacrifice. Translation. The Virat Purusha's face is the Brahmanas, his arms are the Kshatriyas, his thighs are the Vaishyas, and the Sudras are under the protection of his feet. All the worshipable demigods are also overtaken by him, and it is the duty of everyone to perform sacrifices with feasible goods to appease the Lord. Responsively, please. The Virat Purusha's face is the Brahmanas. His arms are the Kshatriyas. His thighs are the Vaishyas. And the Shudras are under the protection of his feet. All the worshipable demigods are also overtaken by him, and it is the duty of everyone to perform sacrifices with feasible goods to appease the Lord. So this is quite a significant chapter in the Bhagavatam, because this is actually where the Bhagavatam begins, because it's Sukadeva Goswami's instructions. If we look at the first canto, there's 19 chapters in the first canto. Interesting enough, there's only 10 chapters in the second canto. It's quite short in terms of the other cantos, especially when you look at the 10th canto, which has 90 chapters. This one has only 10 chapters. And we see in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, obviously there's Sudra Goswami's introduction to the sages with his Mangalarchana, etc. It starts off with Vyasadeva saying prayers, the first few verses. And then we see there's questions by the sages to Sudra Goswami. And then Narad Muni appears in the Bhagavatam, which is very significant. Srila Prabhupada in a purport there, I think it's in the 5th chapter, and he talks about how we are very fortunate that Narad Muni has kindly graced the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you look at the Bhagavatam overall, he is the most common personality. In every canto, except one, I think it is, he's there. Every major person in the Bhagavatam, he's their guru, either Siksha or Diksha guru. And in all these different pastimes, he's facilitating pastimes, things like that. So there's a few chapters there in the middle of the Bhagavatam, the first canto, where it's talking about Narad Muni and his appearance and his discussions with Vyasadeva and his instructions to Vyasadeva. And then it goes on to start talking about the Pandavas and how they're departing the world, how Dhritarashtra departs, how Bhishma departs, things like that. And then it brings it into the conclusion, that brings it into the teachings of Queen Kunti, of course. And then there's the conclusion of the first canto, which is the appearance ultimately of Shukadeva Goswami. It talks about how Parikat's winding up his pastimes. And then in the 19th chapter, it's called the appearance of Shukadeva Goswami. And he appears on the scene. And then straight away, we see that that Parikshit Maharaj is asking Shukadeva many, many questions. And in the very first verse of this, of course, there's an invocation where Shukadeva Goswami is praying to Krishna, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. But the very first verse he talks about in this chapter, he says, Varyan Eshite Prashna. He says, your questions are glorious. Why? Because your questions are focused on the benefit of everyone. You're not just interested in yourself. You're not just doing this because you want to go back to Godhead, or you want this or you want that. Your questions are actually good because they're for the benefit of everyone. And we see the same point. The same point is seen if we look in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, how Shaunaka Rishi and the sages at Naimisharanya, they're performing a 1,000-year sacrifice. But they're not doing it for their own benefit. They're doing it for the benefit of everyone. And this is the nature of great devotees, is they act only for the benefit of others. They don't act for the benefit of themselves, because they understand that if they're acting for the benefit of everyone, then automatically they get benefit. They don't have to worry about it. And we see this point is also made by Krishna in the end of the Bhagavad Gita, where he explains to Arjuna that by explaining this supreme science of the Bhagavad Gita to others, then you become very dear to me. So he's pointing out that this is actually the best activity for a living entity to do, is to present Krishna consciousness to others, because they become benefited. The same instruction that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave to Srila Prabhupada. He encouraged him to spread Krishna consciousness. He said, you'll do good for yourself and you'll do good for others. So this is the life of a devotee, is to spend their life presenting Krishna consciousness for the benefit of everyone else. And in this way, they are also benefited. Then we see in this chapter here, so Shukadeva Goswami has appeared, and Parikshit Maharaj is asking him questions. Because he wants to know, what is the duty of someone who's about to die? He's not asking him, how can I avoid death? How can I prolong my life or anything? No, he's not interested in that, because he understands death is inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. It's easy enough to talk about it philosophically, but when one actually has an experience where you're close to death, then you actually start to understand, yes, this is inevitable. You cannot do anything about it. Our lives are completely in Krishna's hands. I have some relatives right now, and I've had them for some time, but they're not right now. But right now they're undergoing quite a traumatic experience where the husband, he's literally on his deathbed, but the wife's not wanting to let go. She's trying to whatever she can do to keep him alive. Which when you look at what he is experiencing, it's like, I'd be thinking, just let me go. He's really going through a lot of difficulty. Hemorrhaging and all sorts of stuff, but his wife just doesn't want to let him go. But because she hasn't come to terms with the temporary nature of the material body, how the material body, it's only here for a short period. We may think, we're here for 100 years, but you don't even know if you're here for 100 minutes. And this is one of the points that Srila Prabhupada he makes, and also we see here Sukadeva Goswami, he says to Parikshit Maharaj in the beginning of the chapter, he says, you've got 7 days, you better get serious. And Parikshit Maharaj hears that, and he takes it he takes it very seriously, and we see, I'll talk about that in a minute. But the Prabhupada makes the point regularly for us. Parikshit had 7 days. We don't even know if we've got 7 minutes. We could be. I remember I was in the USA when 9/11 happened. When the planes crashed into the World Trade Center, and I was in Seattle at the time, and we heard on the news that because everyone was watching the news because that was a big thing. These planes crashing into the building, especially because everything in America stopped. There was no transport at all. You couldn't go anywhere. And I was just wanting to find out when I could get back to London. And so what happened? Everything stopped. But then as soon as the plane started flying again, a plane took off from LaGuardia Airport, and one of the engines dropped off, and it fell through the roof of a house. Luckily, there was no one in the house at the time, but the engine just demolished the house. So the same for us. We could be sitting here right now, listening to the Bhagavatam. A plane flies overhead, the engine drops off, and it drops through the roof of the building. We're all killed. You just don't know. The material world is such a traumatic place to live in. You just don't know from one moment to the next what's going to happen. Like people just, it happens, you hear about it in Sydney, you hear about it in every major city in the world. People just storm into your house, they ransack the house, they rape the women, they kill everyone in the house. This sort of stuff happens all the time. It's not like it's something that only happens on television. It happens all the time. And it can happen to us at any moment. So this is the point that Shukadeva Goswami is making to Parikshit here. It is like, life is so short, life is so temporary. You need to get serious about Krishna consciousness. And right in the beginning of this chapter, we see that Parikshit has asked Shukadeva Goswami these questions, And then straight away, Shukadeva Goswami, he doesn't waste any time. And we see in the beginning of the Bhagavatam also the sages of Naimisharanya, they say to Sutta Goswami, says, don't tell us about all these other things in the Vedas. Tell us what is the essence of all spiritual instructions. So we see the Bhagavatam. This is why the Bhagavatam is so important, because it is the essence. It's the cream of all Vedic knowledge. It's the essence of all Vedic knowledge. So and Lord Chaitanya, he emphasized that the Bhagavatam as being very, very important for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Here also we see that Sukadeva Goswami, he's saying the same point. I think verse 9 or 10, he says the same point to Parikshit Maharaj. How this is what is it? Brahma Purana Samitam, I think he says. How it's the supreme Purana. It's the best Purana of all, because it has the essence of all Vedic knowledge. And he says to Parikshit Maharaj, it's as good as all the Vedic knowledge in this one book. 18,000 verses contains all Vedic knowledge. So very, very important. Yet we see that what happens is that Sukadeva Goswami, he doesn't waste his time with too much introductory conversation with Parikshit Maharaj. He doesn't ask him how he is or anything like that. Straight away he's into it. He starts to talk straight away about the goal of life. Straight away he presents to him what is the ultimate conclusion. To worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then we see around verse 20, 21, 22 that Parikshit Maharaj asks, because he's telling him, you have to just drive out all these material thoughts out of your mind and have to become completely focused upon Krishna. That way, at the end of life, was it Narayana Antashmiti, he says, at the end of life you'll think of Narayan, if you remove all these impurities from your mind. And then the first thing that Parikshit asked him is, how do I purify the mind? How do I focus the mind? And so then he goes through 3 steps here. This chapter here we see is called the first step in God realization, focusing on the Virat Purusha. Then we see in the next chapter, it's the Lord in the heart. And then the third chapter in this canto is called change, what is it? Not Lord in the heart, change in the heart, pure devotional service, change in the heart, I think it's called. So he's going through, the 3 stages of realization through the Virat Purusha, then through Paramatma realization, then ultimately Bhagavan realization. So he's taking him straight to the essence of it very, very quickly. And we'll see here, this section here is basically just talking about the Virat Purusha from about verse 22 onwards, I think. He's just talking about the Virat Purusha. And explaining, because so many people, they look in this material world and they see so many wonderful things and great things and they become enamored by it. And because of their becoming enamored, they forget about the Supreme Personality of God. They forget how everything's connected to Krishna. So this section here, we see how Shukadeva Goswami is saying that actually everything is Krishna. And we see at the end of the 10th chapter in the Gita, Krishna says, that you should know that all glorious, beautiful and wonderful creations, they spring from but a spark of my splendor. So anything in this world, we can see anything that's in creation. And even in the beginning of the 10th chapter, Krishna, he says to Arjuna that Aham savasya prabho mata savam bhavatade iti matva bhajante mam buddha bhavasam anuvataha. That I, he says, Aham, I am the source of all spiritual material worlds. Everything emanates from me. And the wise who perfectly know this, they engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. And then he concludes saying that, that all these glorious, wonderful things, they come from me. And then we see in the 11th chapter, then Krishna starts to explain the universal form. And by actually not just explaining, but he shows the universal form. And he's not only just talking, everything comes from me, he's showing. In reality, he shows Arjuna how everything is coming from him. And he expands the universal form, and the Arjuna is seeing, and this is the complete universal form, because previously he'd shown partial universal forms, like to Mother Yashoda, and then in the assembly house in Hastinapur, he showed partial universal form. But we're seeing now, in the Bhagavad Gita in the 11th chapter, that Krishna shows to Arjuna the full universal form, and he's seeing everything in creation there in one place. And he's essentially just overwhelmed by all this. It's just too much for him to comprehend, and becomes fearful because he can't digest it all intellectually. And so Krishna is showing how everything in creation comes from him. Just confirming this point, which is one of the seed slokas of the Gita, that I am the source of all spiritual and material worlds, everything. Yeah. He says, Aham Savasya, I, Savasya, everything. Everything comes from me, or of everything, Savasya. Prabha means like the energy or the chief. Not the chief, chief's pradhan. Prabha means like the energy or the power, the effulgence. Prabhav, you see like behind, like this thing behind Srila Prabhupada is called a prabhav. It's like an effulgence. Yeah? Prabhavam. So Krishna is explaining how everything is coming from him. Now we see in this chapter here that in the first stage of God realization how Shukadeva Goswami is explaining to Maharaj Parikshit how everything manifest in this universe is nothing but an expansion of Krishna's energy. We should understand this, that there's nothing in existence that is separate from Krishna. And that's the point that Shukadeva Goswami is trying to make very clearly to Parikshit Maharaj, is nothing in existence is separate from God. Whereas the materialists are thinking that everything is separate from God. Even if they accept God, they'll think, this is God's, this is mine. So Sukadeva Goswami is making this point, and here he's talking about in this purport. In this verse, he's talking about how the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras are all, coming from the Virat Purusha, and actually all the worshipable demigods. And we see in previous verses is talking about how the worshipable demigods are also coming from the Lord. So what's happening here is that Sukadeva Goswami is explaining to Parikshit Maharaj, don't worship anyone separate from Krishna. Don't worship the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, anyone that is separate from Krishna. Don't worship the demigods separate from Krishna. Yet we see here in this material world, I've just come back from Mayapur, and you can see so much Devata worship going on in India. And they're seeing that the Devas are so great, so powerful. When I was driving down to Calcutta to the airport, I think it might have been, I can't remember if it was Kali Puja or Durga Puja. They're very similar to me, but they make these forms of Kali or Durga, different devatas. They make the form out of straw. And they wrap it up and make the shape, and then they cover it all in mud and smooth it up, and then they paint it. And they're supposed to do some kind of ritual to invoke the deity, which they don't do anymore. They just sort of make the form and they start to worship, and then they just discard them. And we see the Jiva Goswami, he explains this, and it's quoted in the 11th canto by Prabhupada's disciples, chapter 27, about how Jiva Goswami, he's explaining how there's different ways of establishing a deity. You can establish a deity temporarily, or you can establish a deity permanently. But when they establish deities temporarily, that's generally because they want to fulfill material desires. So we see the same thing with the Devatas, is generally they establish these temporary forms with the whole notion of just approaching the Devata and asking them for some material benediction. And Srila Prabhupada, he very strongly condemns this kind of worship, because if anyone takes this kind of worship, all it does is simply perpetuates their existence in the material world and increases their material desires. And Srila Prabhupada, he talks about, in various places, how by acting in such a way, it's just like, if someone has a fever and you're simply trying to do things to increase the fever, which is foolishness, because ultimately, if the temperature raises to a certain point, I'm not sure what the number is, but I know it's fairly high, but death comes as a result. When the temperature gets so hot that you just die. So he's talking about how this is actually a form of suicide, because the jivas not understanding their real nature, as we understand, Lord Chaitanya has said, Jivera Hoy Krishnera Nitadas, that the actual nature of the jiva is to serve Krishna. So because they're not understanding that, because they're thinking their position is to enjoy the material world, therefore they're doing so many activities to try to satisfy themselves in the material world. But in the ultimate issue, they don't become satisfied, they become frustrated. Why? Because they're not understanding their actual nature. If they understood their actual nature, they would act to serve Krishna. And this is the point that Sukadeva Goswami is making here. Don't waste your time serving the devatas, because you won't be satisfied by that. And even if they give you some temporary material benediction, as Krishna points out in the Gita, in the 7th chapter, it comes from him alone. And these things are coming from Krishna. So don't waste your time. Just act to serve Krishna. I'll read Srila Prabhupada's purport. Monotheism is practically suggested here. So straight up, Prabhupada is saying it's talking about one person. This is, what's that? The last verse in the Gita Upanishad? Oh, not the Gita Upanishad. The what do they call that book? That's in the Prabhupada's quotes in the end of the introduction. Gita Mahatmya. Gita Mahatmya, spoken by Lord Shiva. And there he's saying Ekam Shastram. There should be one book, Bhagavad Gita. So also saying Eka Devam, Devika Putra Gitam. He's saying that it only talks about one personality of Godhead. So monotheism is practically suggested here. Offering sacrifices to many demigods under different names is mentioned in the Vedic literatures, but the suggestion made in this verse is that all those varieties of demigods are included in the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are only the parts and parcels of the original whole. Similarly, the divisions of the orders of human society, namely the Brahmanas, the intelligent class, the Kshatriyas, the administrators, the Vaishyas, the mercantile community, and the Shudras, the labourer class, are all included in the body of the Supreme. As such, sacrifice by every one of them in terms of pleasing the Supreme... As such, sacrifice by every one of them in terms of pleasing the Supreme by feasible goods is recommended. Generally, the sacrifice is offered with clarified butter and grains, but with the progress of time, human societies produce varieties of goods by transforming materials supplied by God's material nature. Human society, therefore, must learn to offer sacrifices not only with clarified butter, but also with other manufactured goods in the propagation of the Lord's glory, and that will bring about the perfection in human society. So, this is a really interesting statement or explanation of this point by Srila Prabhupada about this, dravyatmakam, the word, the dravya meaning items, just like when we do deity worship. At the beginning we purify all the different items, and one of the categories of purification is called dravya shuddhi, which means you purify all the different items. Dravya meaning articles or items of worship. So Srila Prabhupada here is explaining this dravya atmakam feasible in a very, very interesting way. Similarly, he explains it in a purport in the Bhagavad, later on in the Bhagavatam, where he mentions about worshipping the Lord according to time, place, and available conveniences and inconveniences, which is quite interesting, because often we find that people who have some experience in deity worship, say for instance in India, maybe have a concept of what deity worship should be like. And it needs to be like this, it needs to be like that. But Srila Prabhupada gives a very interesting understanding of it, which is similar to what he's expressing here, is that one needs to worship the Lord, and here he uses the word feasible, according to what's feasible or practical, what you practically have at your disposal. So often, when discussing with devotees about home worship, for instance, they read in the book, it says, oh, you need to offer this, this, and this, and this, but they may not have access to these things. They may not have the facility to offer so much elaborate worship. So, regularly I make the point that just whatever you have available, then you should worship the deity. And this is the same point that Prabhupada's making here. Is that, like for instance, it mentions in the different padatis that you offer arti to the deity, and describes how to offer an arti with incense, lamps, flowers, water in a conch, cloth, a chamra, peacock fan, things like that. But if someone doesn't have that, then just offer some incense. Or if you're living in an apartment where there's all these smoke alarms, and every time you light incense, you get all the smoke alarms going off, then don't offer incense. Just offer a flower, offer a lamp, offer a fan, or whatever's feasible. The main thing is not so much the dravya. It's kind of, in one sense, it's irrelevant. What's really important is the bhakti, the love which you're attempting to serve Krishna with. And the dravya, the item or the ritual, is actually the vehicle whereby we offer our love to Krishna. So this point here that Prabhupada's making is there's so many things in this modern world which we can offer to Krishna. Just like we see here, Radha Gopinath dressed very, very beautifully today, and they're wearing plastic jewelry. Now people might think, well, why are you offering plastic to Krishna? Because we offered real jewels, someone to steal them. So we offer plastic jewels. But because they're on the body of the Lord, they're not considered to be plastic, they're considered to be chintamani. Because they're touching the body of Krishna, they become like transcendental touchstones. So the idea is like, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he regularly makes the point that everything we offer to Krishna should be the best we can possibly offer. Not if you have like something really, wonderful that you can offer to Krishna, but you offer cheap things because you want to save money or something. No, you offer the best of everything to Krishna. And in this way Krishna becomes satisfied. But you do it according to time, place, available conveniences and inconveniences. Just like, if for instance we were living, this was in an apartment building, which happens. Many temples they are in apartment buildings, they have other tenants and stuff like that. So it means for Mangalarti you can't have roaring kirtans. You have to have very quiet finger tapping kind of kirtans, not boot stomping kirtans. But here you're fortunate you can have loud, enthusiastic kirtans. So you need, and you can blow conches and things like that. Whereas if there's people upstairs, you wouldn't be able to blow a conch in the morning. I remember when the temple in Brisbane was in Graceville, that every now and then you get the next door neighbours storming in. I remember one day we were there, and it's like we're having quite a nice kirtan for Guru Puja, and then the next door neighbour comes storming in his dressing gown. He's like yelling and shouting. No one understood what he said. And he just walked back out again. But things like that, you need to be sensitive according to time, place, and circumstance. So if you have neighbours there, obviously you don't want to give them an unfavourable impression of Krishna consciousness. You want to give them a favourable impression of Krishna consciousness, so that hopefully, maybe not in this life, but in a future life, they'll take to Krishna consciousness themselves. So this point Prabhupada's making here, offer whatever's feasible. So whatever's practically available in the market, not that we go and spend so much money. I remember one temple I visited years ago, they were buying all these things that were out of season for the deities. Nice foods, like very, very opulent foods, but very expensive. They're buying like mangoes were costing $12 each. At that time was a lot more money than what it is now. But this is not the injunctions of the scriptures. Like Rupa Goswami, he points out in the Nectar of Devotion, one of the items of devotional service is you offer fruits and vegetables according to season. So whatever's readily available. We see that Srila Prabhupada, he didn't favour offering frozen food at all. He didn't like frozen food. He said it was all rotten, nasty things. So the idea is we offer whatever's available according to season, but make sure it's the best we can possibly get. And we'll see as Kali Yuga progresses, then these things will become more and more difficult to get. Just like, I was having a conversation with someone in Delhi the other day about getting sandalwood oil. Whatever they sell you sandalwood oil in the market now is not sandalwood oil, it's just some chemicals. And it smells nice when you open the bottle, give it a week and the smell won't be there. But it's not sandalwood oil, it's just chemical. So it's very, very difficult to get, almost impossible. Musk, Radharani's favourite scent, almost impossible to get. So this is just the nature. As Kali Yuga progresses, you will find things are very, very, getting more and more difficult to get. But we always try to find the best we possibly can for the satisfaction of Krishna. And that's the point that Prabhupada's making. What's feasible? What's practical? Not that we go to tremendous austerities to try and find, mangoes that are imported from, wherever, paying great amounts of money for it. No, just whatever's feasible. Doesn't have to be, extremely opulent. It just has to be offered with love and devotion, prepared with love and devotion, and then Krishna will accept. Human society therefore must learn to offer sacrifices not only with clarified butter, but also with other manufactured goods in the propagation of the Lord's glory, and that will bring about perfection in human society. So he's saying it doesn't just have to be clarified butter or ghee, whatever. He said manufactured goods, anything. Anything we offer, just like so many things, the clothes that are being offered to the deities, the manufactured goods, the plastic jewelry, all the rings and things like that. These are manufactured goods. Whatever we have, we offer the pleasure of Krishna and become satisfied. Because the whole idea is we're just giving everything we have. We're giving our lives for the pleasure of Krishna. Just everything we have, and the goal is that we get to the point where our every waking moment, our every thought, our every step is just simply there for the service of Krishna. Everything we do is simply there for the service of Krishna. And all other thoughts, all other actions are just rejected. And this is the Bhagavatam. This is what the Bhagavatam is doing. It's kicking out everything. This is the point that's made right in the beginning. It's kicking out all other religious processes, kicking out all other thought processes. Anything else is rejected from the Bhagavatam, and pure devotional service is being described. This is why it's such an important book for us. The intelligent class of men or brahmanas may give direction for such sacrifices in consultation with the previous acharyas. The administrators may give all facilities to perform such sacrifices, and the Vaishya class or mercantile community who produce such goods may offer them for sacrifice, and the Sudra class may offer their manual labor for the successful termination of such sacrifice. So Prabhupada is explaining here how all the varnas, they should just be using whatever it is they do for the pleasure of Krishna. That way, the human society will become satisfied, become happy. But we see now, they're not happy, they're not satisfied. People may think they're satisfied, but if you look at their activities, you can see they're not satisfied. You can see they're actually in distress. But thus, by the cooperation of all classes of human beings, the sacrifices recommended in this age, namely the sacrifice of the congregational chanting of the holy name of the Lord, may be executed for the common welfare of all people of the world. Srila Prabhupada ki. Any comments, questions at all? Yes, Ruba.
I think this is a class. There's often a question that comes around the world on our temples that taking prasadam cooked by non-devotees, and you mentioned the points about offering. So I was wondering if you can...
Well, specifically what do you mean by taking prasadam cooked by non-devotees?
So if someone's cooking is not fully practicing 16 rounds or 4 principles, but he's still offering prasad to Krishna, like for example, if we go to home, like back to see my family, right, my mom wants to cook and I can take that and offer it to Krishna and is that qualified as acceptable, or where to draw the line in that?
Well, probably I wouldn't be offering stuff like that to the deities. But I remember years ago when I used to live with my mum in Brisbane, and she always wanted to cook for me. So I would have her just steam some vegetables, and then I would make her chaunts and prepare that. Because the fact that they want to do something for you as a devotee is an offering of devotion, even though they may not see it as such. But at least it's a gyata sukriti. It's like unknown pious activity or unknown devotional service. So they get benefit from it. You just need to be careful to make sure that it fits within the realm of the regular principles and things like that. But yeah, obviously if you know something's contaminated, there's an interesting letter that Prabhupada wrote to Brahmananda, and he quotes a phrase, dravya mulyena shuddhati. And basically what Prabhupada explains to Brahmananda is that when you purchase something in the market, it becomes purified by the act of purchasing. Therefore, we can accept these things. But if you know it's contaminated, he explains to Brahmananda, then don't take it. So obviously, the same principle applies, is we do our best to ensure the topmost quality. And of course, your mother prepares something like that, you can offer it to the Lord. It's really important to... See, one of the things I experienced a lot, and you still experience it actually, is devotees, when they come to Krishna consciousness, they get all enthusiastic about Krishna consciousness, and they kind of have this massive divide between demons and devotees, and the parents are demons, and all this kind of stuff, And as a result, it's like they're thinking, that what's this, vimuktamanina, avishuddha buddhaya. They're thinking through their impure intelligence that this is actually a really high level of devotional service. But actually what they're doing is just offending their parents and offending all their relatives. Someone who's intelligent will understand how to act in such a way that I can attract them to Krishna consciousness, not how I can push them away as fast as possible. So the idea is to act in a way that your parents are glad that you're a devotee of Krishna. Not that they're acting to try to take you away from Krishna, but the idea is how to bring them to Krishna also. So if you act in a rational way, then what they see is rational anyhow, then you're more likely to attract them. But if you act what they see as being irrational, they're thinking there's something wrong with you, they're thinking you've joined a cult, they're thinking this is atheistic, or they get all these wrong impressions of Krishna consciousness. So it's very important that we act in a way that gives them a positive impression of Krishna consciousness, so that at some point, maybe not this life, maybe in a future life, because they're doing things that are favorable for Krishna consciousness, then they'll have the possibility of taking on full-fledged devotional service. It's very, very important to keep that in mind when you're dealing with family members, non-devotees, things like that. Yeah. What else? Hare Krishna.
In this comment by Srila Prabhupada that we should offer all sorts of manufactured goods.
Yeah.
In the home, does this also refer to offering everything that's bought to support the household, for example, clothes, family members, car, or furniture? Should everything first go to one duty? Are we always only talking about food items? Or is it a little bit broader than everything that comes into the home and first we offer to the home duty?
Yeah, there's an interesting example where Srila Prabhupada was traveling on a train in India, and the devotees bought some, I'm not exactly sure what they bought, I don't remember, it's described here in the pastime, but I don't remember what they bought. Bought some food items from the vendors on the train platform, the platform in the station, and then they brought the things and they set an altar up on the seat in the train, pictures, cloth, all that sort of stuff, and they put the items there and they start to offer them. Srila Prabhupada says, what are you doing? Oh, we're making an offering, Srila Prabhupada. He says, no, it's not necessary. Just in your mind, understand that this is coming from Krishna. So, again, according to time, place and circumstance, we need to at least understand that this has come from Krishna. It's by Krishna's mercy that I have this car, this facility, whatever. I mean, usually you see with devotees, they'll put a picture of Krishna in the car. We just bought a car recently, and the first thing my wife did was put the picture of Narasingha on the dashboard before we drove it anywhere. So that was the first thing she did. So the idea is just to, of course, if you can physically offer things, that's very nice. And that helps to cement in our consciousness the relationship with Krishna. But at least, understand that everything I have is due to the mercy of Krishna. There's nothing in this world that's separate from Krishna. That's the whole idea. Not that we have to, get our car keys and put them on a plate and start offering like flowers or something like that to Krishna. You can, I wouldn't recommend it. I guess you could do it. But, and I've seen devotees when they get clothes, they'll offer them to feed the deities. But if you're going to do stuff like that, I'd wash them first before offering to the deities. I remember years ago I was doing regular worship in Vrindavan, and some devotees from Russia and that, whenever they bought anything in the market, they bought the pujaris to offer to the deities. But it's better if it's washed first. But you can offer everything, but you don't have to physically offer it. You can just do it in the mind. Yeah. Anything else? Prabhu?
You just explained the point you mentioned before that when we buy something, it's purified by the process of time.
Yeah. So what you want to explain it more? There are certain things that are considered pure. There's a list given in the ISKCON deity worship book. Hands of a potter. I can't remember all of them. There's certain things that are considered pure, and there's certain things that are considered impure. But by the act of purchasing, because there's an exchange, like an honest exchange, then this is considered to be purifying. Whereas if you go and steal something, that shouldn't be offered to the deity. It's like devotees used to, I remember when I first joined, it was a common thing when they're making garlands, they go steal flowers, But and like technically speaking, that's impure. But then there's an interesting story that in Melbourne, when they did Rath Yatra one time, they raided all these greenhouses, stole all these prize-winning roses and things like that. And the guy was watching, because Rath Yatra was part of the Moomba parade. And so the guy was watching on television, the guy whose flowers they were, he was watching on television, and he saw, they're my flowers. So he's down at the temple, and he met with Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada immediately said, yes, they shouldn't have stolen these flowers, it's really wrong of them to do it. So he took his side. But then when he was speaking to the devotees, he said, that's all right, you did it for Krishna. So strictly speaking, avoid offering stolen things. But if the ultimate... The thing is, like, there's material consideration, then there's the transcendental. So materially speaking, then yes, all these rules apply about purity and things like that. But when it comes to transcendental devotional service, when one actually has no motive other than to satisfy Krishna, which is not just something we can, I'm doing it for Krishna. We really need to be sure of our motives, and often we find that our motives are not completely pure. Generally we find they're not completely pure. We do have some motive. Of course, someone like Srila Prabhupada is free from all material motives. And if we are in that state where we're free from all motives, then there is no material reaction involved. It's all simply for the satisfaction of Krishna, therefore it's pure. But there's lots of different rules about things that are pure, things that are impure and stuff that come from different scriptures. Yeah. Okay. Something else? Yes, bro.
I have a question regarding essentially, obviously attending the North in Canada, that's what it was more is it more important to do, service wholeheartedly? A lot of devotees tend to throw money into the box and walk away. Out of the two, essentially, would you say the service is more important?
You can't really say that one service is better than another. Because, interesting story in the Ramayana, that Hanuman, we understand Hanuman, very, very powerful person. So he was coming to the shore of the ocean. He's throwing in mountains, mountain tips and huge boulders and like really big things. And there's a spider there throwing in grains of sand. And then Hanuman is trying to sweep the spider away. He says, you just get out of the way, you're going to get hurt. And look, what are you doing? He says, all you're offering is grains of sand. What's the use of that? But the Lord Ramachandra corrected him and said, but I see his service equal to your service. And Hanuman's like a little bit bewildered by that. So why is that? Because he's serving me with all of his capacity, and you're serving me with all of your capacity. So you have to see the capacity of the individual. It's not that, Saraswati bought Srila Prabhupada a flower. Saraswati was a little girl, 2-3 years old. And she offered it to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, oh, you have bought this for me, you're so kind. She's just a little girl, and he was just encouraging her in Krishna consciousness. But she wanted to do something for Prabhupada, and she did whatever she could. Yes, at the same time, this man was bringing a large check, a donation, and Prabhupada just wasn't interested because he had more capacity. So we need to, whatever our capacity is, we serve Krishna to the full of our capacity. Yeah. So for some people, their capacity is to just come and put money in the hundi. That's their capacity. But if they have greater capacity and that's all they do, then that means they're not really surrendering. You know? And Srila Prabhupada, he tells a story about one man that was living in Vrindavan, and he come to Vrindavan and he was just serving Krishna, but actually he left all his money with his family. And Srila Prabhupada was saying, Krishna's not seeing that, he's seeing what he left behind. Yeah? So you have to, surrender means giving up everything, not just the part like you want to give up, but it means giving up everything. And this is the point that's being here with Parikshit Maharaj. Is Sukadeva Goswami is directing him to give up everything, and he does. Same with Arjuna, because Arjuna, he's going to fight the battle, but he doesn't want to kill Drona, he doesn't want to kill Bhishma, he doesn't want to kill Bhurashrava, any of his beloved relatives. He just wants to fight and kill. He'll kill the Kauravas because he doesn't like them. But Krishna's guiding him to, no, you just give up everything and do as I tell you. And that's what we have to do. We have to give up all our material attachments. But we need to start somewhere. So if it's coming and doing service for Krishna, or if it's coming giving donations, or if it's working and offering the results of your work, or at least thinking about Krishna while you're working. Huh? Yeah, and we see in I think it's the 13th chapter, or is it 12th chapter, of the Gita, where Krishna explains to Arjuna, he says, the best is you just surrender to me completely. But if you can't do this, then you do this. If you can't do this, then you do this. And he gives it this successive steps of less and less, service. But is at least think of me. So, we have to serve according to our capacity. But not just be content to stay there. We always need, as Tamal Krishna Maharaj used to say, keep turning up the heat. Keep turning up the heat. So you surrender more and more. So ultimately you get to the point where you surrender your whole life to Krishna. Yeah? Huh? Yeah, I mean, it's like, material world's a challenging place. That's the fact of it. It's just a challenging place. But don't let that be an obstacle to your surrender to Krishna. Because the thing is, the mind is going to find a myriad of excuses to avoid surrendering to Krishna. But you just need to work as best you can according to your capacity, according to the situation you find yourself in, to surrender to Krishna. So if it means you come to the temple and hear the Bhagavatam class, if that's your capacity, then do that. If it means you're giving donations to the deity, even if it just means you come once a day and you bow down before the deity, if that's the best of your capacity, do that. But keep trying to increase. Yeah, nice you're back. Huh? Yeah, that's a beautiful temple here. Yes, Matthew. Yeah. No, no particular order. And where is it? There's a purport where Srila Prabhupada's discussing that. And he mentions how one can perfect themselves by any one of the 9 processes of bhakti. So, and you see in the Nectar of Devotion, it describes how, it describes the 9 processes of devotional service and the devotees who achieve perfection by those processes. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to start off with Shravanam, then Kirtan, Of course, in this age, hearing and chanting is the most effective process. But we see that different devotees perfected themselves, just like we see with Parikshit Maharaj. He perfected himself by hearing, and Sukadeva perfected by chanting. But then we see Prahlad Maharaj perfect himself by offering vandana, prayers. Or Ambarish by Atmanivedana, he just gave everything. So different processes for different people. They perfected themselves. But in this age, particularly hearing and chanting. Srila Prabhupada and Mahaprabhu's emphasized this is the process for this age. But then we see different devotees throughout the ages have particular attractions, and they just surrender to Krishna that way, they achieve perfection. But You can achieve perfection through any of the processes, but in this stage the easiest is hearing and chanting. Very easy. Okay? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.